Our next speaker is Barbara Klimke. Barbara Klimke has been the UK correspondent for the German newspaper Berliner Zeitung since 2008. She studied German and English literature and linguistics at Munich University and has worked as a reporter, writer and editor for various media organizations, including the Frankfurter Rundschau, Kölner Stadtanzeiger and the Süddeutsche Zeitung. She lives in London, but she does know a little bit about Germany too, I think. Okay. We then have Markus Theurer. He has reported for the German daily Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung from London since the beginning of 2009. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung is a leading national broadsheet newspaper in Germany, and it has one of the largest foreign correspondent networks in the newspaper world. Prior to working for the London office of the FAZ, Markus worked as a reporter in Munich at the Frankfurt news desk and the paper Business Newswire Dow Jones. Is that right? Okay. Good. And our final speaker is Kai Rogusch. Kai is a jurist, a specialist in law. He's also a member of the editorial board of the NovoArgumente Magazin, which is not as big as the FAZ, but at least as good. He is interested in institutional matters, especially in the power of the European Union. He has written widely, has also published for other newspapers on this topic, and he is very interested in the questions of democracy and regulation. So, we've decided to not have introductions in this session because we are very pressed for time. So we've agreed to just enter the discussion right away with a number of questions. And our first question would be, given that we're asking whether Germans are still Europeans, the first question would be, what actually does it mean to be European today? How would we answer this question? Yes, I'd start with Dr. Feder, if you want.
I think we have to go all the way back to the Second World War, because that defines, in a way, how Germans define themselves within the European Union and being European. I think the disaster which happened over there and the realization that something like this should never ever happen again in the world or in Europe is the basis for Germans understanding how they define themselves as European. So you would probably find that Germans in general are much less nationalistic than any other people in Europe, and they probably define themselves more as European than the French would, or certainly the Brits would. And I'm going to pass on from there.
Yes. Thank you very much, actually, for being there. That's very kind, and also I like the opportunity to speak to you. I would probably go a bit further than that, and as this is the provocation zone, I would say the Germans are probably defining themselves as Europeans as not taking themselves too seriously as a nation, not as a state, but as a nation, not giving so much. Not being very patriotic. I don't think we're a very patriotic country. You won't see very many flags and things in Germany. And then something else. I think the third characteristic would be never ever to start questioning or start questioning that concept of that very remote, a bit mysterious, non-transparent Ministry of Magic that we call the European Union. You would hardly ever find anybody questioning the European Union in Germany, even now. I think that defines us, right?
Yeah, I do agree with that. The European Union has been a kind of an elephant in the room in Germany over the last years, because we have this tradition, this mantra of being pro-European and that Europe is the future of Germany, and that's due to the history, patriotism as we find here in the UK is absolutely a no-go in Germany. That doesn't exist there, and it's very interesting times now, because I think it's starting to shift a bit. Many Germans are now more
Okay, this is a very interesting topic, I think, as the Germans to European, because Germany is a central part of the affairs in Europe. When we ask what is European, we conclude somehow that this term has something to do with Europe as the origin of the main features of Western civilization, of logical reasoning, democracy, rationality, of the codification of law, the idea of both autonomous subject and of solidarity and so on. But what is also very interesting about Europe, or what is special about Europe, is that it has also experienced a decay of values of civilization in the Middle Ages, and especially in Germany, of course, in the era of Nazi terror. And this is especially interesting because of the Nazi terror and of the experience of World War I and World War II, the concept of people, of demos, as part of democracy, has been discredited. And that is a reason why, after the Second World War, there has been initiated the European unification process, in which something like demos or people doesn't have to play too much a role.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm kind of surprised to hear the Germans saying that Germany is not a nationalistic country. I don't know if we're going to have a public debate about this later. Maybe how Germany is viewed from outside. But if you do look at, one point you made, which is very interesting, is that there is no one questioning the European Union. I think you said it, Barbara. On the other hand, there's never been very much enthusiasm for the European Union either in Germany, I find. So Germany, actually whenever there are elections to the European Parliament, the turnout is very low. In fact, Germany is actually below average, an important country within the European Union, but fewer Germans vote for the European Parliament than in other countries. So nothing like Slovakia, which had a very enthusiastic sort of a very big interest in the development of the European Union. You also mentioned, Marcus, that now there is a growing Euro-scepticism. So you do tend to have the feeling in Germany that Germany is now paying up for all these crisis countries. You had Angela Merkel famously saying that the Greeks were lazy. She said it in a little bit more polite way, but that's de facto what she said. And there is a very strong sentiment, why should the Germans pay for this? So what is actually at the core of the European Union project? Why is it, we would say has there really been a European feeling? Has there really been a feeling amongst Germans that we are European, or is it more a sort of, as you said, we don't want to say that we really are Germans? So is there a real European sentiment in Germany? Yeah, okay, Marcus, do you want to start or?
Yes, I remember asking my neighbour here in London, do you feel European? And she said, what? She said, I'm British. And I said, and I think if you ask someone in Germany, the answer would be, yes, we are European. Not very enthusiastically, but I think we just take it for granted. I think the generation that grew up after the Second World War, and that, as you pointed out, really had to find a new definition of itself after the atrocities of the Second World War and the Holocaust, and finding something new to build. Germany adapted very quickly to that concept, and I think it's actually now in our blood. So I don't think that we are sort of as enthusiastic as a very new sort of European nation, but still I think most Germans would say yes, they are European. Well, they would probably say they're German, but they could also say we're Bavarian, or we are from Hamburg or whatever. But they would say yes, we're European.
Yes, of course, I would agree with that. One is also to say that the politicians that have always been more pro-European than the average German. There have been very passionate politicians in Germany, starting with who were very in favor of European integration, starting with Konrad Adenauer and then Kohl, of course. And they were really passionate about Europe and believed in that project. And the average German, but that was my view, was that the average German kind of took it for granted, but didn't take too much real interest in it. And there was also this, as in many countries, we always had this debate about is Germany paying too much to Brussels and getting too less from the European Union. So it was a mixture of, yes, we are pro-Europeans and kind of the disinterest and a bit of grumbling also.
I think
grumbling gets more.
I think you made a very good point that Germans take Europe for granted. It is there and it's not being questioned as such. There is nothing like over here in Britain where you've got this latent Euro-scepticism and which has been there for a while and which is growing again. This doesn't exist. Europe is there, and the European Union, with all its pros and cons, is simply taken for granted. There is not even that much of a debate about whether Germany is paying so much as it has been in this country too. We just look at what happened here during the Thatcher years, where her famous handbag stories meant that Britain was not going to pay more. And these questions have only come up very recently with the restructuring or with the bailout for Greece and then for the other countries. Prior to that, it was not a question which anybody really asked, and it was not a question politicians took up either. The first time, if you also look at the various political parties, they are through and through European. You may have some dissenters now in the CDU who question certain aspects of the bailout, but the basic premise that Germany is part of Europe is not being questioned. I think that's one key difference between Germany and, for instance, the true Finland with the true Finns, or Holland with their anti-European parties. You don't have that in Germany. And maybe it is also due to the fact that every politician has always pushed for Europe more and with more enthusiasm than the people have shown. That is definitely the case, but there's also a realization that Europe has, it's not been a one-sided thing. Europe has actually been incredibly positive for Germany. I mean, Germany, without Europe, without the free trade which Europe brings, without the weight which Europe brings for Germany on the international scene, Germany wouldn't be the same. Germany has, due to the EU, like other countries too, of course, like France, has the opportunity to punch way above its weight.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I can see some hands up. I'll open the debate to the public. Yes. Bruno?
Yeah, I think Germany in many ways is archetypally pro-European, but European in the sense of European Union. I mean, Germany is a really peculiar country. Germany doesn't have a demos, because the demos was abolished in Germany after 1945, when in the grip of defeat and the huge moral catastrophe of the Holocaust, people, mostly foreigners, wrote the basic law for Germany. The basic law in Germany, being from a critical outside standpoint, is basically a constitution that is, again, anti-majoritarian, views majorities as dangerous. In that sense, the German constitution itself is a bit like the European Union. It's insulated. From the public and has a tendency, a negative tendency, to see majorities and electoral politics as dangerous. And then you take into account that actually German reunification was given rather grudgingly by the French and the British on condition that the Treaty of Maastricht to bind Germany into the European Union foreign policy, to bind Germany into the euro. And then you start seeing that actually Germany is European in that very, very, I'm afraid to say, rather negative sense of being a country that was stripped of its demos and a country that was only allowed to become a country by being bound into the European Union.
Okay. Yes, gentleman behind. Just pass the microphone around.
Yeah, I've only started really thinking about Europe recently, the Eurozone crisis, but and so I'd be interested in trying something. But it seems to me more that the European Union in many ways has been modelled on Germany, in the sense that Germany, at least in the post-Second World War periods, had a revulsion of politics and kind of strong ideas because of reaction against the past. So it's promoted a kind of pragmatic social market economy, a rules-based system, a preference for kind of technocratic rule rather than democracy and political rule. So in many ways that's been also the model that the European Union has followed. So kind of, to me, yeah, it seems like the EU following the German model.
Okay. Any more hands? No. Yes?
I mean, I'm personally a strange amalgam of sort of Anglo-Irish, French, blood and where I've lived in my life. And speaking from that perspective, I'm very happy to say I'm a European, but I'm equally very adamant to say I'm anti-European Union. And those two things have been slightly sort of mingled up in what has been said to some extent. Taking Europe for granted and taking the EU for granted seems to me as a different thing. And that one can be, and I would say it's a positive thing to think beyond your own, nation state, to think in a bigger, humanist project, and being pro-Europe in that sense, is a good thing. But I would question, particularly Marcus here on this side, said that the European Union has been indisputably a good thing economically for Germany, because it seems to me that if you look at, say, the last 10 years of the Eurozone as a facet of the European Union, actually Germany's gone backwards economically in terms of pace of output growth, pace of productivity growth, and so on. And there's a strong argument that people are putting forward that rather than seeing the Eurozone as a positive benefit economically for Germany, it's actually held Germany back. That has actually been a sort of debilitating sort of prop, which has stopped Germany restructuring itself and sort of shaping itself up. So given that, I mean, I would say that's an economic discussion one can have, but it seems to me there could be a perspective of Germany saying, yes, we want to be European, we don't want to go to some sort of nationalist, narrow nationalist perspective, but we should be taking a firmer stance against a very undemocratic European Union and European Eurozone project.
Okay. Tim?
Well, 2 points. I think one was covered a bit by the last question. So I was actually born in Germany, whether or not my hospital counts, I don't know. I was born in America, I've been American, and I have an EU passport. But first point to make is that's a layering. If you ask me am I British or I'd actually probably say I'm not Londoner first of all. But I'm probably a bit different in that. I think you mentioned someone might say that Bavarian or Hamburg or whatever it is. To what extent would you say the Germans, layering? How would they feel themselves as European as opposed to German, as opposed to belonging to their relevant lender? The second question is really from the last question. I think if you look at the when people talk about leaving the EU, I would take two. One is I think there's a xenophobic approach, which I don't go along with. I'm beginning to wonder actually how functional some EU institutions are, because the European Parliament isn't really connected. Now you could say, if you look at the States, a lot of Americans would say, well, if you look at Congress, really, I mean, they're just not delivering. But that wouldn't stop them from feeling American. Is there an element of that to say, yes, we're American, yes, we're European, but you said, you don't really question Europe. I think you can question the institutions of Europe without actually being anti-European.
Okay, actually I'd like to continue on that route and maybe see what the speakers want to say about that. The point of, we said Germany is a very European country, but then the point was made, is European the EU? And we also have the point that it's the politicians, I mean all of us agreed on, or all of you agreed on that point, that it's mainly the politicians who've been pushing the European Union, but have not taken the people along with them. So the question is, we have economic unity, we have financial unity, but what about political unity? Craig, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the point which Udo has made is very important, and because the question is why are the populations in Europe not so enthusiastic about the European unification process? And this is on the one side a very fascinating process, the European integration process on the one hand, because it brings together nations of different languages and size and enables economic integration in a way that makes the EU the biggest economic entity in the world. But on the other side, the European Union and also the German state, yes, is an embodiment of mistrust in people, or mistrust in the demos. That's very interesting, because it is very important to acknowledge that Germany is really, up until now, from the beginning up to now, one of the driving forces of further political integration through the back door. So, from the beginning, there has been the unspoken idea to introduce institutions like the Coal and Steel Association or the Atomic Community, which seemingly serve only tactical economic goals, but which unspokenly imply the creation of some sort of political union in order to cope politically with the consequences of economic integration. So in the end, and without publicly debating about the political nature of the European unification process, the people of Europe are confronted with accomplished facts, and this is a process which now has gained much more clout.
Maybe Marcus, you want to say something because you were.
Yes, I wanted to comment on some of the questions which came up. First of all, I do think that there is some truth in saying that the EU is more modeled according to Germany than according to other countries. But has the EU held Germany back? I would somehow doubt it. I mean, Germany is not a country where the principles of Anglo-Saxon capitalism will go very far. It is from the economic model, it is very, very different. Anglo-Saxon capitalism is viewed with disdain by the right wing as well as by the left wing. Even liberals don't know what Anglo-Saxon capitalism really is about. Liberals don't know anything about anything. In terms of, so I don't think that Germany would have restructured itself according to such Anglo-Saxon capitalistic ideals and gone much further. But you can imagine where the Deutschmark would be now vis-à-vis the euro had the Deutschmark been there and vis-à-vis other countries. Just look at the Swiss francs. The same would have happened with the Deutschmark, and it would have been great for German exports and really appreciated by 20, 30 or 40% by now. Germany would probably be now in another kind of revolution, and certainly with a lot of revolt and very high unemployment. It certainly was. There was one other point, whether we see ourselves, we the big German, we see ourselves more like Hamburgers or Hungarians, where I'm from, or Germans or Europeans. If you come from Hanover, Hanover is really, Hanover has a great reputation for exporting kings to England, but otherwise it's a pretty ugly town. So there's nothing really to speak for. So I don't really feel like an Hanoverian. However, I think that I mean, you've lived in Munich.
From Hanover.
Oh, sorry.
But I do agree.
I've been warned, Marcus, to make just strong statements. You'll probably insult some people. But if you come anyway to the Bavarians, they certainly, I think, first of themselves as being Bavarians, and then Germans. I'm not really sure when they already acknowledged that they're Germans, but and then Europeans. So it is Bavaria versus Prussia, and then the rest.
I'm not a Bavarian, so.
But, yeah, okay.
May I come back to the distinction between Europe and the European Union? And there's something strange happened to me when I first came here. I regarded myself as a true German European and never ever questioned the concept. And I think this is something that distinguishes the Germans and the British probably most in the question of the Euros. The Germans never ever question anything about this Ministry of Magic, as I said, that is far out in Brussels, whereas the Brits question everything. So what happened to me when I first came here was that I realized that I was becoming more and more Eurosceptic. I think actually they've got a point. Yes, they have to sort of regain some responsibilities. Why is the EU micromanaging this? Where's this sort of concept of sort of petty sort of micromanaging come from? And you start looking very differently at Europe. So I came back to my German newspaper one day and I said something. You look into this and this, and he said, "How long have you been there?" I think it's time to get back to Germany now. Then something else happened. This autumn, I went to a discussion organized by The Spectator about should we sort of leave the EU. And then I went to the Conservative Party conference and the Labour Party conference and the Liberals conference, and I went to all the Eurosceptic discussions, and I was absolutely cured. Because what you hear there is, I think, revanchist, and you just cannot subscribe to that. It is just going too far. And there's another point that I think why it's not enough just being and feeling European. I think you have to have some sort of European, political European union, and that is that I think we are on the brink of something new at the moment. There's a seismic shift in the global order at the moment. I think what we're seeing is that our friends abroad, like the US, actually looking the other way. They're looking to Asia much more than Europe. We see China on the rise, we see India on the rise, we see a totally new concept of states in Northern Africa. We look at Russia and we see that Russia is much more unaccountable than it has ever been since probably the Cold War. And in this shifting world, to give up your union and to think that you can actually break it up and stand alone is a very, very dangerous concept. And I think it was Paddy Ashdown who said at the Agora Party conference that he thinks we're actually on the brink of something even more, that you only see sort of every 100 years, if at all, that the hegemony of the West is finally ending after 400 years. And it would be very dangerous to leave your sort of union at the moment and to try to stand alone, because you just cannot face China and Russia alone as Britain or Liechtenstein or the EU. And I think that is one of the points why the European project has to be saved, it has to be maintained. That is not saying that it has to go on like this, and I think there's strong points for regaining some powers to individual states. I think the sort of micromanaging has to end. I think that this concept of, I think they have to downgrade, they have to shed jobs, they have to slim down in Brussels immediately. But also, I think they have to strengthen the foreign policy, and they have to strengthen the economic policy. But leave the sovereign states alone. I think that is the way they have to go.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yes, I can see hands up.
I do agree with some of what you said, Barbara, but maybe in some way it's a little bit one-sided, because you see here in England, of course, you have this very straight anti-Europe, we don't want this kind of position. In Germany, of course, you don't get that. But you do have a growing body of criticism of the undemocratic nature of the whole apparatus. And that is reflected in, in the quality press, it's reflected in academia, it's reflected in the Federal Constitutional Court's rulings. And you sense that there is a real problem for Germany about this Europe, because the lack of legitimacy, which is a problem across the board today for political parties who no longer can communicate any vision to society, is made even more acute by this absolutely bureaucratic and removed nature of this European system. And Germany is right at the center of that, because I know we get a lot of flack here from Britain for, the Germans don't want to pay for this mess and so on. But let's face it, Germany does have to pay a very large slice of that. So there is an understandable disquiet among people about where the hell is this going to get us in terms of financially and economically for the future. And then you have a German government which is mired right in the middle of these contradictions, because on the one hand, it's expected, not only financially but also politically, to be a mainstay of European integration. We see the kind of role that Mrs. Merkel is having to play now all the time in Brussels. And on the other hand, somehow they have to manage to find a domestic consensus. So I think that makes this whole situation extremely interesting. And I think in Germany, inside Germany, the debate about this is beginning in a much more, how shall I put, much more subtle and interesting manner than you think outside. Because here in England, all you ever talk about is should we be in it or not be in it.
I think I agree to the point that even if you had a referendum in Germany, I'm not quite sure that it would actually, if the Germans would say they want to stay in.
And it's also interesting
A
that we
bit
haven't had a
like
referendum.
the Irish when the Lisbon Treaty came up, because the Irish did not say we are anti-European, and I was there quite often. They just said we don't want this, we don't want more of this, just get away with that. It's too much already. But it's not an anti-European feeling, it's just sort of a loathing of this sort of what I call the micromanagement of the EU. I do agree.
And remember, the Germans have never been asked whether they want to join
that
the euro. I think that it's fair to say that the politicians didn't dare to ask them because they couldn't be sure whether they would give up the Deutschmark.
That's the word. So, yeah, back there. No, in the back, the lady with the red pullover.
Hi, I just want to start by saying I think it's a great discussion to be having at this present time, particularly in view of what's happened this week with the Eurozone. And I'd be really interested actually to have this debate in Germany to see what the German audience would say. Although I obviously wouldn't be able to understand the word. English language, foreign language teaching in British schools being what it is. I'd be really interested actually, I'd just like to ask the panel what you feel about the British attitude and, if you like, the British obsession with the World War II, with the Nazis. Personally, as a British person, I find it horrifically embarrassing, the fact that every British schoolchild is taught about World War II and World War I and nothing else. On television there's constant programmes about Hitler analysed from every possible angle. There's just this constant kind of glorification of the Second World War in this country, which I'm profoundly uncomfortable with. And I've certainly got German friends who have said to me, why do you keep banging on about Hitler when everyone else has moved on? And actually, even this week there was, with Angela Merkel coming out and saying, there's so many problems in the Eurozone, we might be looking at some sort of conflict in the future. There were going to be sniggers in the press about the Germans warmongering. What does the panel feel about, do you feel that this is an issue? Do you feel that it's, do you feel comfortable with it, and what are your comments on that?
Okay, right, thanks. Yeah, the back.
I'd just like to ask if it is the case that the nature of the state of Germany is that it's fundamentally undemocratic, what would need to happen in order for that to change and for Germany to be a more legitimately ruled country? I'd be just interested to know what you think has to change institutionally in order for that to happen.
Okay. Well, maybe Carl, you want to answer that question right now. Is Germany fundamentally undemocratic? What would need to change? You could maybe clarify your point.
Now, the German state isn't fundamentally undemocratic, and it is based in mistrust in original democratic processes or in the people. But I think there is a possibility to create new parties to elect to participate in the political process and to other things, and you are not kept out of it if you really are engaged. Now, what the problem is the way the government of Angela Merkel does cope with the current challenges we are facing. And it is very typical of the way the European Union introduces political decisions without discussing them publicly. For I would like to make an example or to make some points. I would say first that political leaders in Germany don't offer their citizens a clear and complete picture, for example, about the current economic crisis of the Eurozone, the economic situation, the true dimension of the whole crisis. And they don't do it because they fear if we speak out the truth, then panic will break out. This is a way why they only reluctantly admit small pieces of the true situation confronted the Eurozone. And second, it seems to me, when the truth becomes more and more known to the public, they react in a way that they deny the consequences which go to further centralization of fiscal policy and the further weakening of fiscal sovereignty. So they deny that they don't want to introduce Euro bonds and so on. And third, after the political consequences more and more become reluctantly known to the public, for example, that we need a constant EFSF or ESM, and perhaps later some sort of Euro bonds or monetarization of debts. These consequences are not presented as disputable decisions, but as a logical outcome of a situation where there is no alternative at all.
Right, I can see one more hand in the back, yes?
Just following your remark, I do not think people in my country, politicians in my country fear something. They don't know how to declare something very complicated to the people, and that's the whole day. In the evening I saw BBC in Parliament. There is a difference between 100% quality meeting.
Yep. Okay, yes.
Thank you. Actually, some participants mentioned that no more Europe should be implemented, but actually several senior politicians in Germany and in other countries talking about the United States of Europe. So the first step might be fiscal consolidation, fiscal union, in order to actually implement control mechanisms to prevent another Greece from happening. So do you think German parties, political parties, would support all the Germans in general further European integration and consolidation, and what is your opinion about it?
Okay. Well,
for economic purposes.
Okay, I'll take the panel in because we have a lot of questions. We have the point about decisions being made above people's heads, but not, the point which was made that Merkel's not carrying the people along, and we have the question of fiscal unity.
I think fiscal unity is at the moment just a word, and no one really knows what is meant by that. You have to fill it with some sort of content. And my feeling is that many Germans are worried that fiscal unity, the fiscal union is another word for a transfer union. And the Western Germans have paid for the last 20 years for the Eastern part of Germany, so they know what that means. And I doubt that there would be any majority in the German public in favor of that on a European scale. But they've never been asked, and it's very interesting that at the moment it's just a word, and you hardly get any answers. What does it mean, fiscal union? Because they know it will be very difficult to sell it to the German public.
Okay, would you like to answer? Because we have more economists than I am.
I actually wanted to talk first about some of the other points. My first one is to make the claim that Germany is undemocratic is that's total bullshit. I think it is really one of the most democratic countries.
It was only a question.
But there was also a little bit of an underlying assumption here in the debate that it's undemocratic, and that people don't trust. That politicians don't trust the people. I think certainly since 1968, when the first round of sort of revolution started, and then since 1989, this has been proven wrong. Germany is a very democratic state. The only thing which they don't have is a plebiscite. So, but that's it's a constitutional democracy. So the parliament takes the decision for the people, which is quite normal. With regards to the question of politicians not explaining enough, well, if you look at what's happening in France or Italy or Ireland, I don't think that Germany is very far behind when it comes to explaining the complexities of what is happening right now in the negotiations about the next bailouts. Then there was the question of the war films, etc. I spent some time when I was young at boarding school over here, and I always found it quite amusing. And people try to wind me up with this, and in a way I couldn't be bothered. And nowadays I find it simply quaint. Why not?
Okay. All right. Maybe you two can have a debate about that point after the session, because we are actually nearing the end, and I'm going to take one more last round of questions. We still have the point EU. How do we stand? What do we demand? I know that Spike has the big campaign, yes to Europe, no to the EU. So I just want to keep that in the room. Yes, one more person here.
Thank you very much. Well, from my perspective, it seems that Germany is sometimes caught between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, it's always said it's one of the most powerful economic nations in Europe, and they should have some kind of a guiding role when it comes to solving the European questions or problems. But then on the other hand, it is like whatever decisions they are taking, they are too powerful, they have too much of a lead, so you can't have it both ways. So
yeah,
I think that it's one of the most demanding problems and issues Germans, and especially German politicians, face.
Yeah, an interesting point. Yes, back there.
Yeah, I think the Marcus on my left is right factually, but draws completely the wrong conclusion about the, what would happen if the Deutschmark still existed. Excuse me, because it is true that if the Deutschmark existed, then it would have a high value, and then Germany would have to strive more to export. So it's benefited from the euro being an artificially low currency. That's true. But that is precisely the problem. But rather than restructure and develop a truly dynamic German economy, it's got locked into this artificial eurozone setup, where it's kind of basically creating a credit bubble in Greece and Portugal and Spain and so on, so they buy German exports. And it's something that worked for a few years, but as we see now, it's completely falling apart. It's actually been an evasion from economic construction, which is what Germany needs. It's not a uniquely German problem, but it's certainly one that does manifest itself in Germany.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Bruno?
I'm really sorry again to come back and be horrible about the basic law again, but I'm going to. I think it's always very important to make a distinction between people and its state. And I think it's incredibly important to make a distinction between the German people or peoples and the German constitutional order. The basic law is pretty peculiar. The basic law has, for example, been changed to incorporate some of the fiscal rules of the European Union, which raises real questions about German sovereignty, in fact, which means can the German people vote without a supermajority to have a non-monetarist budget policy. Now, that's fair enough. If the Germans want to do that to themselves, that's fine. It's a German problem. But when Germany starts using the European Union to impose those kinds of constitutional changes on all countries throughout Europe, then actually the question of German constitutional order as expressed through the EU becomes an issue for everybody. And one of the things that's very interesting is how Germany is using the European Union in the way that France used to use the European Union. It's a way of projecting itself in the area that it sees as its kind of neighbourhood. In that sense, Merkel's speech last Wednesday was absolutely extraordinary. She elided Germany and Europe and said that if Germany doesn't get its way, which means more Europe, then we will see the Second World War. That was the kind of speech the French used to make, not the Germans. And I think that is an important and distinctive shift in the way Europe is functioning, with implications for everybody.
Right, okay. I think we've come to the end. I'm going to give the panel a chance to say one more short sentence, if you want. You don't have to. Don't feel bullied.
I would probably come back to that question of how should the Germans act or react in this situation. I think there is this point, and I think that it also explains a bit of the sort of dithering of Angela Merkel. If you sort of, yes, the Germans have been at the forefront of the European project for a very long time, but they have not. It's only recently that it has been hammered into them that they should sort of actually take more steps and be more bold and sound the charge and things. And then you go back to Margaret Thatcher 20 years ago saying, we have lived through a war, we know what the Germans are like, we know what dictatorships can do, and the national character does not change significantly. This is, I mean, that also answers your question sort of in a way. I wouldn't say that anti-German feelings are very high at the moment in Britain, but I think it is always there, and you have to be careful to toe the line and not to overstep the mark. If you want to be a German sort of government in Europe, you have to be very, very careful. I think explains a lot about the German attitude at the moment.
I think the Euro crisis shows that politics, there's no political will that is strong enough to overcome economics and economic laws, and Europe has to face up to that, and it will be very interesting what will happen in the future, because it's neither both options. You can't go ahead as we went over the last years and decades with European integration, because obviously, at least in the currency union, it went too much, too far. But we also, of course, we can't pull out of Europe and out of the EU. That's absolutely ridiculous. So you have to find a new way somewhere in between, and that would be very interesting and unfortunately very difficult.
Just don't be too afraid of the Germans.
Yeah, one last word. Perhaps it would be the most important thing to present politics as something that we want, not as something we must do. So problematic in this process, in this unification process now, where there is introduced the Fiscal Stability Union, which is of German ideas. imposed on countries like Greece or other indebted countries is that it wants to force unification only with the argument if we don't get stuck together, everything will fall apart and it would be digested as catastrophic. And the better way would be to look what are the potentials in each of the European countries and how to develop them. And in this way, I think if politics is also on the European level in this presented in this way, also they will create new trust or new trust in the financial markets, where people know how to invest the money. And
okay, I think good. Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.